Hello all the English literature enthusiasts. Hope everyone is doing well. In this video, I'm going to talk about the poetic aesthetics of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, who is a leading Indian poet in English. Sri Aurobindo was born in the year 1872 and date of birth was 15th August. He was born in Kolkata and he was a very eminent writer. He was known for his profound philosophy. He was also known for his active engagement in the revolutionary freedom movement of India. At the same time, he was a seer. So all the wonderful qualities are there, and he, far from being a poet, he is also highly regarded in India as a seer, as a rishi. He is a very interesting figure in the Indian writing in English, especially in the genre of poetry. Sri Aurobindo, as I have already mentioned, he was born in Kolkata, but he went abroad. He had his education from England, and he was a proper, in a sense, he was a proper Sahib class or the Babu class, and he mastered the language of English. Though he was a Bengali by birth, but in his demeanor, in his behavior, in his mannerism, he was a perfect British man, so to speak. And Aurobindo, his contribution to Indian poetry in English was tremendous because he started writing poetry at an early age of his life. Later times, he wrote many significant pamphlets and also treatises. At the same time, he was very much well aware of the fact that Indian poetry lacks the perfect theorization. So, his outstanding contribution in Indian poetry is that among all the Indian poets in English, Aurobindo was the only person who formulated a unique theory of Indian poetry in English. We find the explanation of his theoretical understanding of poetry and an exclusive poetic theory of Aurobindo and poetry in his treatise known as the Future Poetry. The Future Poetry was published serially in the Arya Journal between the years 1917 and 1920. In Future Poetry, Aurobindo has raised several important issues on Indian poetry. First of all, he defined very clearly what is an Indian poetry, why the Indian poets should write their poetry. He said poetry is not only a poetic aesthetic or a poetic medium. Far from being a verbal expression or articulation by a poet, a poetry is something transformative in nature. Therefore, poetry is essentially capable of transcending human experience from the realm of the materiality into the realm of the spirituality. Number two, he talks about the wonderful combination of Eastern and Western philosophy through poetry. He opined very strongly that Indian verses are capable of transforming human experience. Therefore, poetry should be read, poetry should be circulated among people for their elevation to the higher spiritual realization of life. Third of all, and the most important theorization of Aurobindoan theory of poetry is Mantric verse. He introduced the term Mantric verse in his treatise, The Future Poetry, where he said Indian verses are not at all quote-unquote poem as such. They are hymns, they are Mantric hymns. Mantra itself is a Sanskrit word, it means hymn. So he said Indian poets should write the verse as if it is a mantra or it is a hymn which is very sacred, which is capable of elevating human emotion, human experience through the realm of spiritual understanding. Therefore, poetry is capable of causing all these aforementioned changes in human life. Fourth of all, he very powerfully defined who is a poet in his treatise known as the Future Poetry. He said, a poet is capable of doing many significant things, and a poet is essentially a rishi, a seer. The seer comes from the Sanskrit word drashta. It means someone who can foresee. And seer, the term seer has profound spiritual connotation. Aurobindo very powerfully attributes the quality of being a seer onto a poet figure. Again, Aurobindoan theorization of a poet very, very powerfully equates the theory of a poet posed by the eminent romantic poets like P.B. Shelley. Shelley, in his defense of poetry, he said, "Who is a poet?" He said, "A poet is a nightingale who sits uh, in the darkness, and he sings out of his own pleasure, and thus he enchants all the humanity." In preface to lyrical ballads, William Wordsworth has said, "Who is a poet? A poet is a man speaking to men." So the poet is a very chosen being. The poet is somebody who is very much endowed with the heightened poetic sensibility, and he is having secondary imagination. Romantic in romantic theory, S.T. Coleridge talks about the secondary imagination which a poet is always having. So secondary imagination is the heightened quality of imagination that enables a poet to create his poetry, to create his craft. So the Aurobindoan assertion of the poet's ability to be a seer or a rishi is very much affirmative, and it equates his role of defending the role of a poet in the Republic, which actually equates him with the roles of the romantic visionary poets like P.B. Shelley or your William Wordsworth. So the decolonial aim in Aurobindo poetic endeavor is very much prevalent from this assertion, because he defines once again the role of the poet in a very affirmative, very positive way. At the same time, he is echoing in his thought pattern with the high priests of British Romanticism. At the same time, he is retaining the clear Indian flavor. It is very remarkable, because he is not only blindly imitating the British high priests of Romanticism in his theoretical assertion about the poet figure. At the same time, he is very much departing from their understanding, as he introduced the term a poet as a seer, a poet is a rishi, a poet is a drishta. So this profound Eastern philosophical assertion and the role of a poet as a seer is very much colored by the Vedantic philosophy, because we find the reference to the seer in Vedanta, which is one of the ancient important wisdoms of our India. So Aurobindo adopted this profound Eastern philosophical understanding with his solid theorization of the poet figure and poetry. And in a nutshell, what happens, what is the result of this? In his poetry, we find the profound assertion on mysticism, the profound focus on the spiritual awakening of human soul, the concept of rebirth. At the same time, the focus on the supermind. A supermind is exclusively an Aurobindoan theorization of mind. He said, when we are very much entrapped into the world of materiality or matter, we are not a supermind. But when we let go of our material attachment, and when we transcend towards the higher spiritual realm, then we only transform our mind into a supermind. So the supermind itself is one kind of byproduct of reading Mantric verses, according to him. And as a poet, if you ask me what are his outputs, literary outputs, literally he was a profound writer, and he was a prolific poet also. He wrote more than 200 verses. He wrote pamphlets. He wrote epic poem like Savitri. So first of all, he is well known for his epic narrative Savitri. Savitri itself is a mythic anecdote from Mahabharata. Savitri is generally imagined as a beautiful chaste wife of Satyavan in Mahabharata narrative, and Savitri fought with Yama, the god of death, so that she can reclaim the life of her husband. So Savitri in Indian soil is generally known as the symbol of chastity, virtue, and renewal of life, or optimism and hope. So based on this small Mahabharatian anecdote, Aurobindo Ghosh has formulated 24,000 lines. Now he wrote the beautiful epic narrative Savitri, which is a very beautiful poetic assertion. Savitri is systematically focusing on the themes of rebirth, renewal of life, positivity, optimism, hope, supermind, and the profound understanding of Vedantic philosophy. Later, we are finding beautiful poems, sonnets in his writings. Now, if you talk about the short pieces written by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh, we find the reference to the Stone Goddess, which is a beautiful sonnet. There is also another beautiful small poem, the Surreal Science. So these are basically his masterpieces, and Aurobindo's understanding of poetry is very, very profound, and it is very much philosophical. And his English, his diction, the way he structured a sentence, everything gives us the sense that as if we are reading a hymn, a sacred hymn in the Vedantic tradition. And his profound understanding of the Vedantic philosophy colors his poetic assertion also. So, unfortunately or incidentally, we do not find any significant poetic figure after Aurobindo who has carried forward Aurobindo's style of poetry, who has been able to represent the Mantric verse. Though R.N. Tagore is very famous, he was the Nobel laureate of India, but still we understand, or after Aurobindo, we do not find any significant poetic figure in India who would continue the tradition of Mantric verse as postulated by Sri Aurobindo Ghosh. So this is my understanding about the complex philosophical poetic aesthetics of Sri Aurobindo Ghosh in Indian writing in English poetry. If you find this video, please do like, share and subscribe to my channel, and keep on watching. Bye bye.